all the essential notes and feedbacks and critiques that I received from mentors and heroes that were essential, that someone was being direct with me and not saying the good job. I felt both critiqued and affirmed because that person, that mentor, that educator in a way, saw me as worthy of critique.
This is Arts Educators Save the World, where successful artists and their mentors talk about how arts education transformed their lives. Welcome back to Arts Educators Save the World, a podcast where artists and their mentors talk about the impact of arts education on both of their lives. Hello, Alek.
Hello, Erica.
It's nice to see you.
Very nice to see you. Just to be clear, just again, so everyone knows, digitally, virtually, not human form. But I see you.
It's true.
Nonetheless. And you have a nice haircut? Is it a haircut? Or is it just,
I think I'm just having a good hair day.
Looks good.
Thank you. I appreciate that we are on video, so at least you can see my good hair day.
Your
even
hair.
If our loyal listeners can only imagine how delightful my hair looks today. And to move things along today, we are going to hear from two of the hardest working people behind the scenes in theater and opera and performance, composers Shaina Taub and Jeanine Tesori. At the time that we recorded this interview, Shaina was performing 8 shows a week in her Tony Award-winning show, Suffs. So she met with us in between an 8-show-a-week performance schedule, and Jeanine just finished a run of her brand new opera that premiered at the Met. So when I say these are two extremely impressive human beings, I do not think I am overselling. A couple of really interesting features of the conversation for people to pay attention to. First of all, this is a focus on the art of composition as a particular category of making live performance and making theater. We talked very early on in our show, in our very first episode, with Bobby Lopez and Lin-Manuel Miranda, also composers, but their mentorship conversation was with an elementary school music teacher, and so we didn't focus as specifically on composition as an art form. So this was a really cool way for us who love theater and make theater but do not compose music, a chance to get a window into that. And we spent a lot of time talking about, within the educational space of composition, feedback and critique, and how feedback and critique function in educational spaces around composition. So that was a particularly, interesting strand of the discussion. And then the last thing that I think is interesting for folks to pay attention to is the various discussions that we had about gender. And, these two women are known as two of the greatest living female composers, to which they take a little bit of issue, and they would prefer to be known as two of the greatest living composers, though mentoring women, particularly into the professional theater, has been a focus of Jeanine's teaching. So there's an interesting tension there, I think, between an interest in being known for who you are as an artist and using that platform as an opportunity to support women who have been left out of the composition conversation, at least in the American music and musical theater, for many years.
Yeah, for me, it's the joy of doing no research before the show. That's
Alek's favorite joy.
I guess I knew about Shaina, but Jeanine nothing. And I think everyone will agree she from the beginning, she just blows you away. I mean, just hearing her biography, I was like, oh, I should have read something, or maybe not, because I enjoyed hearing it from Shaina, but truly just extraordinary people and amazing careers, and very, I guess, even though they both talk about the process, and you're always learning and you're always growing, just very my friend uses this phrase to actually talk about how actors get into characters. He says he's very dropped in, very like in themselves. And I feel like just as humans, these two are very like, oh, you're just doing what you do. You have a thing that you do, and you really are definitely doing it. And it's a joy, and just it blows you away.
I am so thrilled to talk with two incredible powerhouse women today on Arts Educators Save the World. It is my honor to begin our time together by introducing today's artist, Shaina Taub. At 36 years old, composer, musician, actor, singer Shaina Taub has already created and starred in 3 adaptations of Shakespeare plays, performed off-Broadway in some of the 2010s most exciting musicals, and starred on Broadway in her own Tony Award-winning musical Suffs, and released 3 albums of exciting, genre-bending pop music. While the Tony Awards for Best Original Score and Best Book of a Musical for Suffs may be her most well-known awards, Shaina is already a highly decorated composer and lyricist. Among her decorations is the Fred Ebb Award for Musical Excellence in Musical Theater Songwriting by a songwriter or songwriting team that has not yet achieved significant commercial success. I assume Shaina took this as both an honor and a challenge. This morning, while I was preparing for our recording, I was listening to Shaina's album, Die Happy. I ended up listening to her song, Where Are the Grown-Ups, on repeat. I've often said that adulthood is the moment that you look around for the grown-up to solve a particularly sticky problem and realize it's you. Since that happened to me, trapped in an airport with my then 5-year-old and 19-year-old daughters, trying to get home from Australia to get to my father-in-law's funeral, I am almost always the grown-up. I relish the times when someone else is the grown-up in the room. So what a joy to get to spend the next hour with an artist who has sang gleefully in my ears all morning that she is the grown-up I have been waiting for. Shaina Taub, I am so delighted to see you today.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
Thank you.
Intro. Yeah.
So I would love for you to bring into the conversation our mentor that we're going to be talking with today.
Yes, I would be delighted. Okay, get ready, everyone. Jeanine Tesori, otherwise known to me as the GOAT, greatest of all time, is the most honored female composer in Broadway history and has written many legendary works for theater, opera, and film. Her musicals include Kimberly Akimbo, Soft Power, Fun Home, Shrek the Musical, Caroline or Change, Thoroughly Modern Millie, and Violet. I mean, hello. Amazing. She's a 2-time recipient of the Tony Award for Best Score and a 2-time finalist for the Pulitzer Prize for Drama. In 2015, she and the amazing Lisa Crone became the first all-woman team to win the Tony for Best Score of a Musical for Fun Home. Her operas include A Blizzard on Marblehead Neck, The Lion, The Unicorn and Me, and Blue, which received the MCANA Award for Best New Opera. For her opera, Grounded, she became one of the first 2 women to be commissioned by the Metropolitan Opera and the first woman in the 139-year history of the Met to open a season. Huge deal. Tesori also served as supervising vocal producer on Steven Spielberg's West Side Story. She is the founding artistic director of New York City Center's Encore's Off-Center series and a lecturer in music at Yale University. Please welcome the amazing Jeanine Tesori.
Hey, thank you. It was very strange and wonderful. Thank you.
I always find it also strange to have somebody tell me about me in this kind of setting. So I appreciate you both sitting for that. I would love to kick things off, since this is a podcast about mentorship and about teaching and learning, with the story of the time you first remember working together. And it's okay if it's not the same story. I didn't ask you to prepare in advance. So I would love to hear from each of you your own perspective on your first time sharing space together.
All right. Well, it's a multi-pronged story for me let's see. Okay. So I first met Jeanine when she came to visit the theater camp where I was going. It was in the Thoroughly Modern Millie year, and she came to talk to the campers and to do this masterclass for us. And I was so obsessed with Thoroughly Modern Millie. I couldn't believe it. I was so thrilled. And I got to sort of be in a receiving line after the event and brought her my Forget About the Boy sheet music to sign, and she signed it, and I have this signed sheet music. So that was a long time ago. And then around 2013, I think, when Jeanine was starting to found at New York City Center, the Off Center program that I mentioned, she was forming like an artist council, which was so amazing. Just like have this collection of artists to sort of weigh in and talk about what the season might be. And I had my friend Ben Wexler, who I knew was her assistant, I think, and correct me on any of this, Jeanine, and he brought me into that council. I just remember I got this email invitation from him of come to this council meeting with Jeanine Tesori. I was like, are you serious? This is amazing. Yes. And so I showed up to that, and that's when I think I properly met Jeanine. And I remember I said hello, and Jeanine, sorry, I'll try to talk about you not in the third person while you're present. You were like, oh, have we met? And I said, well, kind of. I mean, you signed my sheet music at camp. And she goes, thank you for immediately aging me. And
Sounds right.
Which is an exchange that I've now immortalized in my show Suffs between Carrie and Alice. I don't know if I've ever told you this, Jeanine, but
No.
they have that exchange where Alice goes to meet Carrie, and she's like, well, technically we met when my mother took me to this meeting and I was a kid. And she goes, thank you for immediately aging me. And every night Jeanine gets a huge laugh. So thanks for that.
You're welcome.
So that's why I remember sort of being on that council and getting to be a part of that incredibly invigorating creative conversation around the season at Encores. Yeah.
Yeah, that sounds right to me. I guess my memory is, mentorship for me is a very important thing. I'm usually mentoring about 5 to 10 people one-on-one. We have an organization called Tall Poppy, which is an enterprise founded by the three of us. It's sort of bespoke in that we have codified something very quiet of taking artists at critical junctures and making sure that they have a bridge one-on-one. And if they need recording equipment, we'll do that. If they need weekly songwriting sessions or narrative designs, we'll mix them up. And that came out of this idea of what happened at Off Center and something that I was part of called A Broader Way, which was a leadership through the arts for girls from 8 to 18. So for my whole life, it's been incredibly important to make the circle of learning exactly that. We learn as we teach. I've always struck about the German word for teacher is very close to the word learner. And so on that idea is that wherever you are, you meet a student, you become a student, and you go forward. So when I was doing the Off Center, it was finally an institution that allowed me freedom to try out some of these things in theory and put them into practice of what a board could be, where the ask is not financial, but the ideas, which are more valuable than accumulated wealth to me because they are wealth of a different kind. That ask is very precious. And one of the first things I did was to get composers together, Cesar from the Lisps and Shaina and Ben Wexler and Julian Harnick. And we did a concert of emerging composers. And that's when I first remember Shaina performing. And I was like, oh, these collection of people it doesn't need to be so formal. We don't need to wait for the fancy invite. We just create a space, put a mic down, and then invite people into the room. That was a big hurdle for me to understand what that could mean, by using your whatever you have, whatever social capital you have, or capital you have, to create a literal platform for people to be heard. And that sort of started our relationship and others about promoting teaching, but also revealing people's talents to a group of people and then seeing where it went.
Shaina, had you always wanted to be a composer? Was that always your kind of driving mission as an artist?
No. I was a theater kid wanting to perform, wanting to be in the show. And I was always in the school musical and taking dance class and doing that whole thing. And I played piano. But I think part of it is I never saw composing or creating work modeled for me. I grew up thinking that musicals came fully formed from the North Pole to us, and they were these texts. The idea of process didn't occur to me. I was like, these are the finished holy texts that we do, and it just didn't even really seem like an option. It wasn't until I got to college and I was in the musical theater program. And then I took a class with the late, great Elizabeth Swados. For anyone listening, is just a legendary composer, director, theater maker of Runaways and so many more important works. And it was the first time in her class that I kind of saw that people were making things, and I was around other students who were excited about creating their own work, and that kind of opened that up to me. Yeah. So it was really not till I meet a lot of younger songwriters now, teens who write me letters at SUFs who are writing songs at 12, 13. That was not me at all. I think I wrote my first song in my junior year of college.
And then how did you get onto this radar of the board that Jeanine is describing?
I think it was through our mutual colleague and friend, Ben Wexler, who was sort of a part of organizing this. So I think he kind of helped me get in there, but I was so moved by how much you, Jeanine, valued the input and insight of younger artists. I sort of thought, well, what would I have to offer to that? I'm so young. I haven't really done anything. The fact that Jeanine wanted to surround the table with artists at all different stages in their careers was really powerful to me. And so I was a part of those discussions and gatherings, as Jeanine was describing. And then at the end of that, I don't know if you remember, but I wrote her an email. I had just been commissioned by the Public Theater to adapt Twelfth Night for this big community musical that we did in the park. And it was sort of my first big opportunity. And I asked her if she'd be willing to let me kind of come to her studio and play her some drafts. And I couldn't believe when she said yes. I knew how lucky I was to get to just have, to know that someone of her stature valued mentoring the next generation in this way and would even make any time for me at all. It was something I never took for granted.
I'm a nerd for process. And I'm a nerd for how to describe process as learning. And I'm wondering if you can both say a little about how composition and songwriting looks as a making and learning process. In other words, when you said now, Shaina, you brought some of these drafts to Jeanine, like, what does that look like? You go to her house, you play something on the piano, Jeanine, you give feedback in the moment. Like, tell me about what one of those conversations involves.
It's a difficult question because process is like saying, what did you say during that conversation 3 weeks ago, right? It's very, very specific to the moment in time. I think it's why it's very hard to go back and write a show that you finished 10 years ago, because it's the same, but you're different. I mean, for me, that kind of process is very much, you check your ego. That's the real goal. and you meet a writer at what they're trying to do as opposed to, which really takes kind of practice of saying it's not how I would write it. What are you writing? And who do you bring? What kind of pull are you bringing? What are you wrangling with in your life? And then there is, I'm an endless searcher. I still go to school for it, about narrative design, about the cultural storytelling globally. I'm going to France next week to meet with students. I'm not just interested in the American industrial Broadway complex anymore. It's not alluring for me. It's not that it's not a goal. I'm really grateful to have it. It's where I totally understand it, but it is not what it once was. It's not the shiny thing anymore. The shiny thing to me is about meeting people of all ages. When we had that board, the youngest member was 14 and the oldest was 81. Because I'm not interested in just young people. I'm interested in the elder. And I think because of ageism, when we call about emerging, I know a lot of emerging artists who are 70. And so it's trying to really look back at this and thinking what's missing in the cultural bend of storytelling, and how do we all benefit from the circular look. So that is the preamble to say, what is this artist at this moment asking for? And what can I give, and how can I do harm by, in many ways, because language is powerful. And when in the beginning, when I was starting out, those panels, those dreaded panels, they would say really critically blunt, harmful things. The process is, you want to leave a class or a panel or something inspired to write, even if you're stinging from criticism and you need like a Hershey's chocolate bar stat. You want to unlock that Jenga piece to just say, what is it? When I leave a narrative class, that's what I'm like, wow, I don't know what I don't even know that I don't know. And that endless search for me is to me what makes a great teacher, is what they're creating is fertile ground for learning when the class bing bong ends.
Yeah.
Shaina, how do you experience that as a student? Doesn't seem like the right word to capture what Jeanine just described, but as a partner, how do you experience that feedback?
Oh, I mean, student for sure. I'll be a lifelong student in so many ways, and especially of studying Jeanine's work. But I can think of, there were 4 specific times that I went to Jeanine's studio to play an early draft of a song that was the feedback she gave me was completely transformative to what the next draft was. And what I remember from those sessions, Jeanine, is you would ask me the questions you would ask me, and always relentlessly challenge me to think of it as a dramatist. What is the central question? What is this character pushing up against? What are, and really forcing me to think about it like a playwright. I think when I came into Jeanine's office in 2015, 2016, I was really just sort of, relying on musical tools that I thought could maybe get the job done on their own without that undergirding of dramatic structure and character and all those things. And I think that I had enough skill or style in some musical ways that other people were not challenging me in this way, that I was sort of, I think, on some level able to get away with songs that I knew that if I went to Jeanine's, that I was going to be like creatively x-rayed and she could see through it, like in the best way, that I knew she was going to push me to articulate what exactly I was trying to do. And it asked me the questions of, I remember, I would play you a song, and it's not that you would immediately come to me with all the yeses or nos of what is working, isn't working. Be like, well, what is this character struggling with? What is her central question? What is she would push me to articulate what I was trying to do, and then let me know if I was accomplishing it or not with what I had.
First of all, Jeanine, I just want to thank you for from all of us who, artists who have done a lot of stuff, but are, I don't like to use the word waiting for a break, but who are always in search, right, of the next job that's not just coming to them. The notion that I am a 49-year-old emerging artist, and to embrace that is vaguely emotional, actually. And so thank you for that. It's a different way of thinking of myself. So truly, I'm usually here for the jokes, but thank you for that. Also, the other reason that I'm here is I always like to push Erica to give us an educational frame. And yesterday we talked to Bjork Lee, and she talked about also a difference in creative style. That is, there was a day where the choreographer shows up and goes, "Here's a choreography," and it is, as Shane is describing it, it has come from on high, from me. It is my gift to you. Do it. And Shane is talking about this idea of that was her image of your image of where work comes from, rather than what you've not just discovered it to be, but I think through people like Jeanine, it has become that work is being created here in the moment. It's alive, it's moving. And Erica, this all just sounds to me like traditional education that versus what you're hoping education is becoming now, that it is not mimeograph sheets handed down from on high, but it is a relationship between teacher and student, especially one where Shane is inspired by feedback rather than a bunch of red circles on a test saying wrong, 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 wrong. So the question is, Erica, do your thing. What are we hearing here right now from an educational lens?
The place I wanted to go was, and in my book, there's a section about rethinking assessment and how arts practices give us the opportunity to rethink what assessment should look like for learners across all disciplines. And I heard in your conversation a lot of relying on critique practices and not criticizing, although that does happen a lot, but critique as like noticing and using those noticings as opportunities to reflect back to the maker. Here's what I noticed in the work you're doing. Is that what you intended? B, if that is what you intended, here's what I'm taking from that. And then how does that afford opportunities to move the work forward in maybe a direction that you had imagined or maybe in a different direction? And I see that in a lot of my own art making processes and work with young people around making art. And I want there to be more of that in all forms of learning. That assessment is not an opportunity to say you did a good job or you didn't do a good job, or I liked it or I didn't like it, but rather, here's what I notice, here's what that makes me think of, and here's what I wonder about.
I think that's such I really am going to order your book as soon as we get off. I'm not just saying because, again, that what you're saying to me extends to the paternalistic pat on the head called the review. And there is something that exists. And again, as I've aged, and I want to do a town hall with critics and artists sitting together to try to understand what our relationship is and maybe could be, because I don't understand it anymore. I don't understand. I've read all of Virgil Thompson's critiques, and I now don't understand. It's not about them being well written or not well written. I don't know what they're serving, these critiques. It seems like so many of them are noticing what they haven't seen on the stage as opposed to what is there. So the review of the negative space, especially for people who are trying to do something and disrupt something, it really takes an in tune noticer. And part of it is the time poverty and the labor that takes from critics now that they have to review sometimes 7 things a week. But those words become transactional. It's just a part of a system. But I think for a lot of us, it becomes that A+ that we are then, because we've made a work, and the difference between me and an accountant is not that much, except I am the numbers. The numbers is my interiority that I'm putting onto the page. And then someone is saying A plus or D. And so that interesting push pull, as you're saying about assessment, I think extends all the way down to line, as opposed to let's center the artist. What are you making? If you're a sixth grader or you're a 3-year-old or you're 49, what are you making? How do you hear the world? How do you see the world? What do you think is missing? How are you, as Toni Morrison saying, writing what you want to see? What's your culture? What's your ancestral pull? Tell us, put that on the page. And then let me ask you about the design and the architecture of it, because right now your building ain't got no windows in it. Now that's okay if you want us to sit in the darkness, and that's design. But if you want some light, you're going to need a window. So it's really that design aspect to provide structure and offer structure, as opposed to, you know what you should do? That's different. So I think when I think about the chain of command, Erica, as you're talking about, it also relays for us the metric of all the way up about getting a benediction from those on high, which is, it's like, I don't know how you get out of that system.
Kids experience that on high literally every day in their classroom. So I really appreciate, trying to shine some light on that, and with the hope that it maybe, I don't want to say trickles down, but expands into like people's everyday learning lives. Well,
4 + 4 = 8. So if it's not 9, so that's what I was saying, and Shaina knows this, is sometimes in the math of music, there is like, I wrote an A, you're singing an A flat. That's not exactly what I wrote. So there's an exactitude that is that, right? And then there's this other thing about assessment that has nothing to do with that. And I feel like the awareness of that is I'm going to have to think about that after this call.
Well, remember, you're making me think of Jeanine. After we had one meeting, Suffs was still running downtown at the Public, but I was already trying to figure out how I wanted to revise it. And I was sort of in the wake of some critical response from the world that did not feel good. And I was sort of running down for you what my producers were saying, what the critic, like all these things. And you just told me the most important thing is that you figure out what you want to make and make it more of that. It's your show. It's not their show. Which sounds so simple, but it was a reframe that I desperately needed, because I think the student mentality in me, I was a type A achiever little girl, wanting to get the best grades, wanting to go above and beyond, wanting to get all of these external markers of validation and achievement academically, in the arts, whatever it may be. I think there was a part of me that thrived in that in that metric-based system that I still, even now, and that, I was 34 when we had this conversation, I still wanted to get my gold star. And I think you helped me reframe, like, it's your show. Your people are I remember you saying to me, like, people are going to come for you no matter what you do. You have to, at the end of the day, be able to look yourself in the face and know that you did everything you could to make it what you wanted it to be.
And I learned that from Maury Yeston. The first thing, and my students walk in, I was like, y'all have A's. Can we now get to work?
Yeah.
I'm not interested in grading art. Grades do not interest me in the very least. If you don't show up, then I'm going to have to dock you, but that's boring. That is a waste of all of our time. Show up, do the work. If you're not here for the rigor of it, there's the door, because I'm very direct, but I really care. That's a combination. I am not for everybody, but grades are the least about it. And yet, how do we measure? I can't make a cake unless I measure that stuff. I don't bake. But if I did bake, I would have to measure stuff, or the cake would come out like inedible. So how do we balance? And I think, Erica, that's the thing that we're always trying to process, of how do you balance the concrete of measuring what education means, and how do we assess and also look at each human being is so valuable, and everybody has a certain kind of wisdom in addition to, they just do. And how do we measure that?
And I'm thinking about, as you're talking, how to potentially move away from a metric-based grading system while not forfeiting the rigor of critique. as your, because I think one of the rigorous critique and questioning that you would give me in these sessions was the lifeblood of it for me, of knowing that I could go to someone who wasn't just going to say that sounds nice and was going to like really, really push me was necessary. So how to, and I'm not an educator, I maybe hope I could be one day, but yeah, how to hold on to the rigor without making people think it's all about a external grade.
I always think with critics, and I mean this in the most literal sense, why are they? I realize it's a thing that one could physically do. You could go watch something and then write about it. But why does this exist? I'm not convinced it's a useful tool in the world. I understand that it's part publicity, but that's very different. Writing about a show and critiquing a show are two very different things. And we all know the power of one review by an overtired reviewer in the Times can just close your show the next day. And I truly, truly wonder what its purpose is. So I put that out there. I fear it because also from the artist's point of view, it's so easy to dismiss the negative reviews and then embrace the positive ones. And that's dangerous too. If you're dismissing is I think is the healthy choice.
Alek, I think what you're saying is bringing it back to Erica too, is that, for me, the world when it works best is all education, is all like a critic teaches us. In the best, most exalted, a political leader is a great parent who says, stop doing that, or let's be kind to each other. Let's take care of each other. How do we now train for conflict resolution within ourselves? So it starts with a holiday table. Everybody's at a holiday table now, right? Where they're not talking. But I think a critique, which is not non-transactional, can say as an assessment, I think this is in the history of context of what is happening. Here's its place, as opposed to it's good or bad.
Right.
As opposed to using, vitriol or punishing or shaming language, which is often so thrown about, which without remembering that there are human beings dangling at the end of those, to just say, here's what I think they're going after, and here's the lineage. But that takes a tremendous amount of time and care and understanding, I think, of what's happening at large. And when they're not paid very much, their pay is just dreadful, and they have so much to do. I think that is the first thing to go, which begs the question, as you're saying, why are we critiquing? I think in its, as I say, in the greatest position, it's a position of teaching us why it matters.
In my own teaching, where I prepare educators, I prepare both folks who are going to be elementary school teachers to integrate the arts into their classroom, and I also prepare artists and activists who want to be teaching artists, so not formal educators, but working in museums and nonprofits and artists in residence. I do a shtick. I don't like to call them lessons because that implies something that doesn't quite fit my style, but I do a shtick that I call getting past good job. And so every one of my students has to develop a language for sharing what they learned from someone else's artwork you are not allowed to use the phrase good job, and you are not allowed to use the word like or love or anything that isn't pointing directly to something in the work, identifying it and describing it, and then connecting it to something that it either reminds you of or a question that it raises for you. And the reason for that practice, I think I'm realizing in some ways, is a lot about this conversation, right? Because as soon as we get into, and Shaina, you even said this, right? Like, you want your teacher, your mentor, your colleague to not just say like, oh, good job, right? But you want them to point to the aspects of the work that either resonate culturally, Jeanine, as you're saying, or resonate personally, or evoke something that maybe you intended or didn't, and that points you toward how the work can continue to evolve. It's really hard, by the way, for people who want to be teachers to not use the phrase good job. Do you know how many times teachers say the phrase good job in a day? I mean, it might be hundreds. And so trying to back away from that without going to the vitriolic, I hate this. It's not good. It is really a challenge.
For me, critique at its best or most healthiest, I try to view as a sign of respect when I'm receiving critique from someone I so admire and look to as Jeanine or other. I find in our field of musical theater writing, there is such a generosity and love among the craftspeople who make it towards the next generation coming up, that to me is that love is expressed through critique. I could hopefully one day I'll fully get to share, all the essential notes and feedbacks and critiques that I've received from mentors and heroes that were essential, that someone was being direct with me and not saying the good job. But I knew it, I felt both critiqued and affirmed because that person, that mentor, that educator in a way, saw me as worthy of critique in the way every student and every child or every whatever age you are should be who's in a learning environment. But I think that's how I've tried to frame it for myself as the receiver of it.
My name is Graham Isidore. I have a progressive eye disease called keratoconus. Admitting I'm losing my vision has been hard, but explaining it to other people has been harder. Lately, I've been trying to talk about it. Short-sighted is an attempt to explain what vision loss feels like by exploring how it sounds. By sharing my story, we get into all the things you don't see about hidden disabilities. Short-sighted from CBC's Personally, available now.
Shaina, I think you are in an especially unique position because you often embody the roles that you write. And I'm just curious how that changes if it does, this process for you and this journey of creating work.
I like, in terms of learning, there's a lot to be learned from being inside of it. And to be learned from sitting in the audience. There are different sets of data to be collected. For me, as a performer, to have to kind of operate the machinery I created, I find out pretty quickly when a part is faulty, because I'm there every night feeling the energy of an audience. And if something isn't landing, I feel that over and over and over again. Or I feel something is landing, I feel that over and over and over again. And there's sort of a pool of data that I receive. And also in embodying the role, it becomes clear to me when something doesn't ring true, or a song, in our final reading of Suffs, there was one song slot, the first song slot for my character Alice, that I'd gone through so many iterations of, and we had our final reading before doing it on Broadway, and no one was really saying to me that song was an issue, but I could sort of feel it in my gut, because as doing it, it was the one piece that didn't ring true. And then I remember I had a drink with Jeanine a month later, and she was like, that song, right? And she's the x-ray she saw, and was able to talk to me about it from a craft perspective, about, we could get into it or not. I don't know how tangential this is to the theme of the podcast, but I had felt, to answer your question, a visceral impulse about it not working from having to do it myself, and then stepping out of it and sort of being two fellow mechanics under the hood with Jeanine was able to sort of diagnose it from a craft perspective.
Jeanine, do you play other roles? Do you direct? Do you sit in other seats, I'm going to break the metaphor, of the machinery? Do you get to look at things from those other artistic perspectives?
I don't, well, when I'm working on a project, I work from the ground up because I'm constantly, I'm back at the Met observing the Aida rehearsals. And people are like, what are you doing on Aida? I was like, just learning, just sitting with the score. And it's very odd. I took civil procedure at the law school at Columbia for the same reason. I just sat at the back. It's like, who's the old white lady? Because I feel like you don't make a big deal out of it. I'm just hanging out and learning. And then what I learned from Civ Pro, which is what they all call it, is the book is really heavy. And also there's a precision of language inside the law that I really appreciated because there is an imprecision inside the talking about something as abstract as music. How do you talk about music and what you want? It's very hard to describe, especially when you're around a table with people who are intimidated by musical knowledge and nomenclature. And I know when I'm the petty part of me is just like irritated, I can spew all of this vocabulary that will distance myself from them. And that's not a very generous way. And that there's another way to use precision of language that has nothing to do with musicianship. It just has to do with being alive, because at the end of the day, I think what we're trying to do is put stuff on stage or in the concert hall or in the classroom that we see outside, and create a circle in that. So when I work really closely with directors. I work really closely with how things are staged because of the tension inside the physical planes of a playing field. I played field hockey. I was not a theater kid at all. I didn't even know what musicals honestly were. So, if you look at sports and you play sports in the ways that the field works, it's staged. It's like, it's why, that play about soccer was so great that Lila Neugebauer, right, that she directed. It was just like so much about, that's the collaboration in the teams. So I feel like it's on me to really read a lot, observe a lot of rooms where I can. So when I say, I just feel like there's something happening up there that it's not like I'm a choreographer. I don't know what I'm talking about. But I do know when I see that something is missing, that I can start a conversation about the video and make sure that I get to strange video installations so I have a point of reference. I feel like if you're going to be in the theater, that it's important to crack your mind open and not just see the stuff there was a great article I just read about somewhere about like when things are for you. I'm using air quotes right now, of to go to see things that aren't air quotes for you. And I think that was such a good mind blower about saying like, right, step out of your own bowling lane and go see things that you're sure you're going to not respond to.
I want to switch gears a little bit. And actually, before we started recording, we had a little conversation about the two-sidedness of how gendered, Jeanine, your success is described as. And I'm interested in that aspect of your mentorship relationship, Shaina and Jeanine, that, that you are described as the most decorated female composer. And, you even mentioned you created a project to bring, women composers along in this process. And so there is perhaps, and this goes into the sort of...
Not really, though, just to jump in. It wasn't for composers. It wasn't for... It's that a lot of women do not use their voices. A lot of women end up in trouble or in prison because they do not use their voices. So it was really about a way of speaking up and finding their own leaderships to lead themselves and others. For me, who I mentor is not it's not gender centric. It's really just a vibe, honestly, about people. I think that I have something to offer them. But the gender line it's like I bristle and I understand it. It's both.
Yeah.
Because this is going to sound arrogant, but I'm one of the most decorated composers.
Right.
And that's that. And it's also not interesting to me because it's like that stuff just doesn't, I just want to work. And I can't believe that I'm working in a business that I've said this to so many people, but I thought Gypsy when I was 19 was an Eastern European musical. I had no clue what anything was. I played like in bands and field hockey, and I played classical music as a little secret until they kicked me out of the programs because I was a problem. So when I was 14, they were like, "You're out. You're such a problem." And I was like, "I am a problem." That was a declaration, right, of a teacher saying, "You're a problem." Mm-hmm. And I thought that's a tender age when someone reviews you and assesses you. You're our thorn in our side. And I think that's right. And then it becomes a self-fulfilling thing. You become a professional thorn in people's sides.
Yeah, I relate to that.
Mm-hmm. And so Shaina, is there, I don't know, do you feel that tension as well? Or is that part of how you see kind of this mentorship relationship? I'm curious about, I don't know, your experiences with this gendering.
What Jeanine just said about I bristle and I understand really resonates with me because it's both and. I'm super proud to be a woman in this business. It has unique challenges and joys, and getting to talk to someone who's been through it in the most monumental way and getting a bond over that and wanting to be an example for younger women coming up is true. And it's true that I just want to be assessed on my achievements like anyone else, and the gendered way it can be described. Sometimes I feel similar to Jeanine. I'm like, well, how many people in general have to, it's both. So I think that it's just this this contradiction we hold as women artists. I think of wanting to be proud and wanting to be ourselves and not wanting for that identity to define us. I mean, we just saw it play out on the national political stage, of how much is your gender an asset versus a liability? How much of it is everything you are and how much of it is not what you are? Those are things to wrestle with, and how, I mean, it's a whole nother can of worms. Jeanine and I have talked about what can it mean to balance motherhood and being an artist, and what does that look like? That's something I'm interested in, that I've asked about, and it's something I wrestle with in my own life and in my characters' lives. I mean, going back to critique, Jeanine, after one of our final readings of Suffs, pointed out to me that I never contended with the main character as a woman in her 30s, contended with her choice not to marry and have children. I remember saying to Jeanine, like, Jeanine, it's not about that. The show is about like women working and fighting for something. It's not. And Jeanine was like, no. You don't have to like add an arc with a lover. But if I'm not in her head when she's wrestling with those questions, I don't know if she'll feel like a human person or, and so that to me was a crystallized example of this debate of, I was like, I don't want it to be about the woman thing. I really resisted anything that would make Suffs be like this girl show, quote, or air quotes, this show that is this, I wanted it to be something that everyone could see themselves in. And yet, of course, it was always, in order for it to feel as human as possible, it needed to embrace how gendered it was. Is that I think that contradiction that I think can be a feature as a dramatist, because those are juicy, thorny questions, can sometimes be a bug as a person to try and balance. But yeah.
And that's always, I think, a tension in not just creative spaces, right? But in human spaces, which is how much do we highlight the aspects of ourselves that shape our human experience, and how much do we aim to universalize what that human experience is and does.
That's the push-pull, I think, of what we're talking about as it goes to education. There are things you cannot possibly measure, but you can sense and feel and taste and smell. And that is part of assessment as well. And I feel like that kind of thing for teachers, because I've been teaching my entire life, not as a full time because I wouldn't be able to make work, but it's been so important to me because it was the only way that I recognized. I grew up in a house with a tremendous amount of domestic violence, and my only way out was through my teachers. Like, school was the only safe place for me and my sisters. That's where we went. And that idea of, and every time I talk to teachers, I remind them that there are many me's out there who, that connection to what you do for us when you assess that what we're saying, it's a safe place, not just because it's not home, but because what we're saying is worthy of noticing, of noting, of challenging, of, I was celebrated by 3 or 4 of those teachers, and one was my music teacher, of saying, what do you think is going on here inside the beautiful, gentle debate of encouraging thought, encouraging that thing where that was encouraged-ish at home and could often be met with violence. So it was, for me, such a way forward. And that's part of my passion for teaching, comes from the way that it completely saved my life.
That's why we, not to be too cheesy, but that's why we tell these stories, right? That it is, in fact, often the relationship between educator and up-and-coming person. I don't even, again, student doesn't seem like the right the right word for it, that is responsible for keeping people in the world, and for making sure that folks make the commitment to stay physically, intellectually, psychologically. So just to wrap up, what's a project that you are working on now that is interesting to talk about in this context? So, are you mentoring other folks? Is there a new work that is in this critique process? I'm just curious about where each of you is headed in the coming year or years.
I'm about to start on a couple new pieces. But I also, we were talking about before, I have this small organization with Darren Biggert, who is at the Shed, and Toya Beard, who is a producer and director, called Tall Poppy. And we mentor on a very quiet level, artist to artist. And we've been in business for about 15 years now. And a little bit shorter than that. And we're continuing on. So that usually happens out of my studio, but also we meet people, and they're all ages, about where they are. And the other thing I'm very passionate about is something Annie Kaufman, who's a director, and Tanisha Dugan, who is a producer. We started something called the Cast Album Project, taking works by often marginalized artists. Our first one was Deirdre Murray and Cornelius Eady's Running Man, and we recorded it at Lincoln Center in a live recording, a sort of template that we've been working at, dealing with unions and getting a beautiful recording. It's just being mixed now, and we're hoping we have our next one set that we'll do as part of the American Songbook, because if a musical isn't recorded, it's usually not programmed. So programming a lot of these works, like Radiant Baby, was never recorded. It's a beautiful work by Deborah Barsha. Promenade is not properly recorded by Maria Irene Fornes. So we came together to sort of put our passion for archiving. Theater's ephemeral, just like life, it goes away, but a recording does not. So those are two things that I'm staying up all night about worrying.
That is so amazing. I really look forward to hearing more of those albums. For me, yeah, I am starting work on 2 new musicals, and I'm really excited to, in my next chapter of artistic process be in collaborations on both projects. There's 3 authors. I'm writing scores collaboratively on both. And after being doing the solo gauntlet of SUFs, which taught me so much, I'm really excited to write collaboratively. I think I'm going to learn a lot from that. And then SUFs is going to tour the country, and it's going to be touring under this new administration and everything that means. And so I'm just trying to think, and SUFs is going to go into the licensing market for high schools and communities, which has always been my main ultimate dream for it as a show. And that, for better and worse, Broadway is the in terms, I'm thinking about what Jeanine's saying about if a show is not recorded. Also, in a lot of ways, if a show is not on Broadway, it doesn't have that national platform to then be done in the schools and communities. So I always wanted, as a kid growing up in rural Vermont, my one access was doing the school play. I think that's the most democratic version of this art form, where on Broadway, we have wonderful audiences. I'm so thrilled about our Broadway run, completely grateful, love everyone who's come in, and a lot of the people I want to get to experience and embody SUFs are never going to be able to afford that Broadway ticket, and maybe even not afford it on tour. So I'm excited for this new chapter of the show now that the creative process element is done, and I have this, how can I sort of be a thoughtful ambassador of it for years to come, especially in these next 4 years, and how can I kind of use it in the spirit of mentorship for a young generation of girls and kids to hopefully grow up taking on these roles, embodying this history that I think the next administration would rather they forget and never think about. So, and how that hopefully can be a tool.
I love how both of you describe projects that are about art making as expansion and access. Expansion of who gets to count as art makers, both as composers having their work captured and as actors, being able to embody some of these roles. Because I think, that for me is mentorship at a sort of asynchronous level, right? You're not directly working with those folks, but you're providing structures that give opportunities for people to be mentored through the work you make, which is a nice place to end, because one of the critiques of the kind of work that I do is about scalability. And so people will say, oh, it's so nice that you can think about creative process as teaching and learning, but we have to teach, there are 300 million people in this country, right? Not everybody can have, I think, Jeanine, you described it as sort of bespoke, right, relationships. But the kinds of projects that you're working on take these ideas to scale in innovative and compelling ways. So thank you both for being here on this podcast, and thank you both for the transformative work that you do for our artistic community. Alek, our resident crank, you got emotional during this episode. I don't think I've ever seen you react quite that way. Hearing from Jeanine that her most powerful learning spaces are where emerging artists of all ages come together. That really hit a button for you. What were you thinking about?
I think it was also the timing of when we recorded. It just so happened that you didn't tell me you were going to ask me that. It just so happened that I make a lot of stuff, but like an iceberg, there's 99% of it drowns. 99% of it doesn't see the light of day. It's just there for boats to crash on, and which is fine. It's that's sort of the artist life, and for some people, for some artists, it's the artist life that you're just making a lot of stuff, and maybe one day you finish something. Maybe one day the world gets to see it, and it's an important skill to be able to say that's part of the deal. Part of the deal is in trying to make things is a lot of it's just going to be in the trying, And the not happening is going to occur for many reasons. One, because you don't finish things, or because, like me, you try to make things that kind of take a lot of money to make, and then you just need other humans to care. So when you have people, mentors, of all ages, who remind you that, two things. One, that it's never too late, but also more that, no, you've been making the stuff. It's okay. You've been doing it. Don't look back and say, I haven't done anything yet. One probably has done things by my age. Am I waking up every day and doing exactly the thing I want? Do I get to just go compose my next Broadway show and it will definitely be on Broadway? No, but just having her view of, there are people of all ages and all places and all times doing all kinds of things at any point in their life. I think I needed to hear exactly when she said it.
That's amazing, because Jeanine obviously has been in the mentorship space for a long time, and we heard some about her formal mentorship, right? Teaching at universities, and then this purposeful bringing together of artists of all ages and experience levels as an act of mentorship that it sounds like is a very different experience for those who are participating than being a student of Jeanine's at Columbia University, right? I mean, Shaina sort of talked about having been a student at NYU and how different this experience of learning with and from and amongst a curated group of artists as an opportunity for growth and change and exploration. Seemed like the right thing for you to hear, and really, I don't know, inspiring to know exists.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I think that there are people out there, and I definitely count myself as one of them, for whom a classroom is just never going to quite be the place to get your best learning on. No matter how many great teachers and great schools I went to, was the person who was always looking at the clock. That is my memory. My number one memory of school is looking at the clock, even in my favorite classes. For whatever reason, that just didn't speak to me as a place to learn exactly, but put me in a group of other artists and a collaborative project, which should be a place to learn and not just create. That's where I want to be. And I don't think she'll let me into her group, but it sounds like a great place.
It makes me think about the authenticity of that space. And we talked a lot about feedback and critique and how those processes function in a making process, both as a learning process, but also as a creation process. And I think feedback and critique in a classroom environment, no matter how good the mentor, no matter how professional the mentor, still always feels like something that happens in a class where even as you respect and love your peers that are in that class, there's an authenticity to the feedback loop that happens in these kind of curated, multi-hyphenated everything spaces that seems really inspiring as an artist.
Here's who we should have on the show.
Yes.
We should have a director and an actor who work together.
Oh.
Because if I think of I don't really mentor. I guess I teach sign language interpreters. That's not true. I do quite a lot of it, actually, now that I'm saying that out loud. But where that skill has helped me is as a director being able to talk to actors or being able to talk to designers, talk to anyone. Now, in that case, there is a lot of, no, this is the way I want it. Can you do that? But that's not a great, also, if a costume designer comes to me, I have no taste. I don't know, but I'm trying to figure out what they're doing and kind of what I see and where can we meet in the middle. And so that form of mentorship too, of like you're saying, very authentic. I must I must learn you something in this moment right now for the art to progress. That's sort of the way that I've benefited from learning that type of feedback and avoiding something that just simply feels, I believe this, and so it's right, you're wrong, then you're just not moving forward, even if that's true. It's very hard to move forward as a pair, as humans, if that's the way you're talking to someone.
All right. Any actor-director combos who want to come and have that conversation with us, we are here for it. Alek, I have a question for you as we go off into the good podcast night that I would love to share with you and our listeners. What are we are recording this right before the new year.
Yes. 3
New Year's resolutions.
Oh, God. Just to say this, this is my advice to people. Last month, I decided I was going to make a couple of changes in my life, and I did. So I'm done.
Great. So three changes you made in your life in December.
That I'm going to keep doing. I am doing Peloton every day, almost.
1.
I am listening to better. I am going to France next year, and so I am listening to a constant stream of French podcasts at least once a day.
2.
I am listening to all of Bob Dylan's albums in order. I've decided to start binging music instead of television, but also television.
3 things. Those are most excellent commitments. Let's call it, instead of resolutions, we will call them commitments.
I am committed.
Would you like me to do 3 things?
Oh, right. We're not done. The show continues. And we want to hear from people. We want them to interact with the show. We know they're out there. Hi, everyone who's out there. How can they do that? What are 3 ways that they can do that?
Most important thing, you can hit the follow button on whatever podcast app you are currently listening to this episode.
Was that sentence? That was an interesting sentence.
On.
I want to hear. I don't know. I want to hear that sentence back. 1 thing.
Once you've hit that follow button, we would love you to rate our show, 5 stars preferably, but the more stars we get, the more people will find out about us.
2.
And if you are so inclined, we would love for you to leave a review telling us about your favorite guests and why other people would love to listen to our show.
3 choses.
Onward together.
Arts Educators Save the World is hosted by Erica Rosenfeld Halverson and produced and co-hosted by me, Alek Lev. Our executive producer is Doug Matica, and our audio producer is Justin Asher. Special thanks to our collaborators, the brilliant and talented Kate Baldwin, and our great friends at Story Pirate Studios, Lee Overtree, Benjamin Salka, and Amy Fiore. Original music is by Dan Lipton, and our artwork is by Lyra Evans. Check out our website designed by Cole Locasio at www.artseducatorspodcast.com. We're on Instagram at Arts Educators Podcast, and you can write to us with your questions and comments at contact@artseducatorspodcast.com. You can also find us at a place called YouTube. And wherever you're listening, please remember to subscribe, rate, and review. It really helps the show. We're proud to be sponsored in part by the University of Wisconsin-Madison and the Gibb Faculty Fellowship. Arts Educators Save the World was created by Erica Rosenfeld Halverson and Alek Lev.